Hi everyone, and welcome to today's session, Best Practice in Providing Pensions. This session is one of a series of interactive webinars hosted by Field Fisher's Employment, Pensions, Immigration and Compliance team, also known as EPIC. We'll be hosting a 30-minute session every Tuesday at 1 p.m, covering significant legal developments, hot topics, and offering practical guidance for businesses and organizations in the ever-changing environment. I would like to start by introducing myself as the moderator of this webinar and my co-presenter. My name is Jeremy Harris. I am a partner in pensions based in Field Fisher's Manchester office. I have 30 years of experience in advising employers and trustees on the full range of pensions matters, including advising on transactions with employer debt and employer covenant issues, and advising on de-risking and tax-related pensions matters. My co-presenter is Andrew Patton, a director in our London office. Andrew has particular experience in pension funding and de-risking arrangements and pensions governance issues, and chairs the Association of Pension Lawyers Funding and De-risking course. In today's session, we will be covering the topics shown on the next slide. We will start with a brief summary of employers' minimum pensions legal obligations. We will then consider the significant mismatch which tends to exist between individuals' retirement benefit expectations and the contributions currently being made to their pension arrangements. We will look at how employers can help employees bridge that gap and at what is meant by good quality pension provision. This is likely to continue to be relevant, at least when the economy has recovered from. We will talk about the range of possible structures or platforms can be used to provide pensions. We'll consider employer responsibilities related to investments and member communications, and the decumulation options as to how pension benefits are drawn by members. If you have any questions, please use the question box in your control panel on the right-hand side of the screen, and we will aim to get through as many as possible. If we do not get time to answer all the questions, we will follow up individually. All our sessions are recorded and available on the Field Fisher website and YouTube channel. Let's get started. So on this next slide, historically, provision by employers of pensions for their employees has been a voluntary activity. Minimum standards have gradually increased over time, mostly in the last 25 to 30 years. However, until 2008, there was no general obligation on a UK employer to contribute to a pension scheme for his employees. Automatic enrolment was introduced in 2008, under which all employers of UK employers are obliged to enrol all their UK employees, earning currently £10,000 a year or more, into a pension scheme. Employers are obliged to contribute at least 3% per annum of qualifying earnings, currently between £6,240 and £50,000 per year, into the pension scheme for those employees. It is the employer's obligation also to deduct employee contributions from employees' pay and to ensure that aggregate employer and employee contributions to the pension scheme are at least 8% per annum of qualifying earnings within the same band. Under the 2008 legislation, there is no employer obligation to contribute to a pension for employees earning less than the auto-enrolment threshold of currently £10,000 per annum. Auto-enrolment has led to a significant increase in pension scheme membership and in pension savings overall. Employees have the right to opt out of auto-enrolment, but opt-out rates have been low. It remains to be seen what effect the economic lockdown will have on this. However, even with current low opt-out rates, it seems that minimum auto-enrolment contributions are unlikely to be sufficient to meet most workers' retirement expectations. Many employers have considered making more generous pension provision for their employees than the automatic enrolment minimum, because of the reputational risk in the long term of their workers being left with inadequate pensions and potential management difficulties if their workers are reluctant to retire as a result. I have already drawn attention to the significant mismatch between employees' retirement benefit expectations and their actual likely outturn. A long and comfortable retirement tends to cost a lot more than most people think. Last October, the Pensions and Lifetime Savings Association published UK retirement living standards to help people have an idea of what their future retirement might look like and what it might cost to get there. Not surprisingly, research indicates that 51% of people focus only on their current needs and not on future retirement, and that only 23% of people are confident they know how much they need to save. The PLSA's indicative retirement living standards set out 3 alternative levels of financial well-being in retirement. The minimum level means all your needs being met, plus enough time for some fun, like holidays in the UK, eating out once a month, and doing some leisure activities twice a week. Including the full state pension of £8,776.20 per year, this involves a retirement income of £10,200 per year for a single person, £15,700 for a couple. This level will be achievable on the basis of minimum auto-enrolment contributions to a workplace pension. If workers want more than this, the PLSA study suggests that higher pension contributions will be required. A moderate retirement lifestyle, with more financial security and more fun, such as a 2-week holiday in Europe each year and eating out a few times a month, would require a near doubling of the retirement income to £20,200 per year for a single person, £100 for a couple, on the PLSA's figures. A comfortable retirement, with some luxuries, such as regular beauty treatments, theatre trips, and 3 weeks in Europe a year, would require more than 3 times the minimum level of retirement income under the PLSA study, at £33,000 per year for a single person and £47,500 for a couple. These are, of course, high-level indications of the required retirement income, but they beg as to how much this will cost in terms of pension contributions. The question then arises is how can employers help their employees to satisfy their retirement expectations? The PLSA in January 2019 published their pensions quality mark standards. These are designed to raise standards in defined contribution pension schemes. In order to get the PQM kite mark, the overall pension contribution level needs to be 12% of pensionable pay, rather than the 8% minimum auto-enrolment figure, and the employer contribution at least 6%, rather than the 3% minimum employer automatic enrolment contribution. The PQM Plus level requires a yet higher standard of 15% of pensionable pay in overall pension contributions, including at least 10% from the employer. Alongside these best practice pension contribution rates, there are best practice principles which must be complied with in order for a scheme to attain PQM or PQM Plus. None of these principles are a legal obligation, but they may be used as a recruitment tool to attract the best quality staff when the labour market tightens. Achieving good pension benefit outcomes requires good governance as well as adequate pension contributions. Part of best practice is for employers positively to encourage employees to join the scheme and to select higher rates of contributions where there is an option. A PQM scheme will have a well-run trustee board or pension committee with a diverse and appropriate range of skills and experience, and will encourage member engagement. The PQM standards also affect how the trustee board or pensions committee should communicate with scheme members and the range of funds in which the scheme may be invested. There is also the pension position of the low paid. Auto-enrolment does not address the situation of those who earn less than £10,000 per year. Those low earners will also have no tax incentive to make pension savings if the only pension schemes available to them operate tax relief based on net pay contributions as opposed to tax relief at source. The government is currently undertaking a call for evidence on this issue. As well as considering levels of pension contributions, it is also important for employers to consider the legal structure or platform for their pension provision. Different degrees of regulation and cost apply, depending on the type of pension scheme to be provided. The highest level of regulation and cost, but the greatest control, comes through an employer operating its own trust-based pension scheme. This could involve broad employer powers under the trust deed. The employer would commonly have the power to appoint and remove trustees. Those trustees would select the range of funds, investment funds, from which the member would choose to invest their pension accounts. However, this would involve high costs in terms of admin expenses and management time. At the other end of the scale is a group personal pension scheme. This has the lowest level of compliance, cost and management time from the employer perspective. But under such a scheme, the employer loses control of pensions. The range of investments is controlled by an external provider. Whilst the employer may change the GPP provider, this could come at some cost to scheme members in terms of investments being in more than one GPP, or transfers of funds being subject to surrender penalties. This is also true of a self-invested personal pension, even if the members may have more influence on investments. SIPs offer the possibility of direct investments chosen by members, but this may involve greater risk. A way of achieving the economies of scale of a GPP or a SIP whilst retaining the occupational nature of the scheme would be a master trust. However, a similar loss of employer control occurs here. The trustees of the master trust will be independent of the employer. The trustees will determine the range of investments available to scheme members. The benefit of a master trust lies in the professional trustee board operating high levels of governance. With the Financial Conduct Authority's introduction of independent governance committees for workplace personal pension schemes from 2015, there has been some bridging of the compliance gap between occupational pension schemes and GPPs. However, IGCs are designed to make sure that GPP providers are accountable to scheme members as regards such matters as value for money, rather than giving influence to employers. My colleague Andrew Passon will now take you through the other topics on our agenda, beginning with pensions investment. Andrew.
Thank you, Jeremy. So the degree to which an individual will be able to have the kind of retirement they're aspiring to will of course depend not just on how much they and their employer contribute to their pension, but also on how their savings are invested and perform. Now, the pension industry, both in the UK and elsewhere, has long experienced the fact that many savers don't either have the knowledge or the appetite to engage with how their pension contributions are invested. And for this reason, all auto-enrolment schemes are required to invest contributions into a default fund, that is, unless the member actively chooses other investment options. In contract-based schemes, it will be the pension provider which sets the default investment strategy, which is being overseen by the provider's independent governance committee. And in trust-based schemes, it's the trustee's responsibility. However, in both cases, employers should look at whether the default strategy and investment options available are a good fit for its workforce, and this might not necessarily always be the case. In practice, all schemes will have a default fund which adopts some sort of lifestyling approach. This is where the expected level of risk and return is linked to the member's age. So typically, the fund will have a higher risk, higher return investments for younger members who are some way from retirement, with investments being transitioned into less volatile but lower return assets nearer to retirement. However, lifestyle strategies do vary between providers, and some may be more suitable than others for a particular employer's workforce, and it's important for you to get the right one. So, for example, Nest, which is a scheme set up by the government to ensure all employers can access an auto-enrolment scheme, has a default strategy which has been a bit controversial. This is because for younger members, it operates a low-risk, low-return strategy for the first 5 years of membership. It does this because it says psychologically, and there's probably some truth in this, people will tend to opt out of schemes and be put off pension savings for good if they immediately lose money on their investments. And they also say that the difference in returns in absolute terms between a low and higher risk investment strategy for a small pension pot is very small. However, some younger members have been quite unhappy that they'd be missing out on potential upside of a higher risk investment strategy. Employers should also consider what other factors are important to its employees. So, for example, does the default fund adopt an environmental, social and governance strategy which reflects the employer's and its workforce's general views? Or, taking another example, is it important for a fund to be, say, Sharia compliant? Employers should also consider the range of other investment options a provider offers and their suitability for its workforce. Taking Nest as an example again, it offers just 6 funds in addition to its default fund. Now, this simple approach may well be appropriate for many workforces, but a workforce which is more financially astute may be unhappy at not having access to a much wider range of funds. If an employer has a very diverse workforce, there is of course no reason why it can't have more than one pension scheme and more than one default fund, although in practice this is something that only large employers are likely to do. And what about keeping an eye on things after a pension scheme has been selected and put in place? Well, employers are not legally required to review and monitor their workplace pension scheme, but it is considered good practice, and it's certainly something that we would encourage. Employers will be concerned here more with contract-based schemes or master trusts, where they have less of an influence and connection with the scheme, compared to a trust-based scheme, which they've set up themselves, and which is likely to have member and employer representation on the trustee board. There are a number of benefits for employers of monitoring their scheme, and I'll name 3 particular good examples of why they might do this. So, checking that the scheme is being administered properly and providing an appropriate level of service to employees, ensuring employees are getting value for money and that charges remain competitive, and reducing the risk of complaints. While not legally an employer's responsibility, poor levels of service, mistakes, or employees considering they're paying too much for their pension provider or don't have access to the right investment funds are likely to take up employer time and demotivate employees. The pensions regulators also issued some helpful guidance to assist employers with monitoring their schemes, and its recommendations include, and again I'll name 3 of them, establishing a formal management committee to formalise scheme governance. And here the pension regulator, if you look on its website, has actually provided some useful example terms of reference. Implementing governance arrangements to ensure that investments and products are reviewed on a regular basis to ensure they remain fit for purpose, and regularly reviewing investment options and the default investment fund to ensure they meet the needs of scheme members. So, for example, a scheme whose default strategy is based on a member using his or her entire pension pot to buy a lifetime annuity at an assumed retirement age, that's no longer likely to be appropriate. How formalised your review process is will vary from employer to employer, and for smaller employers, it may be that simply getting feedback from some employees on a periodic basis and getting some high-level input from the person who helped them put the pension scheme in place is enough. Moving on to the issue of employer support, I mentioned before that experience is that many employees find pension schemes and investments simply very difficult to engage with. And Jeremy's mentioned that many people are simply not saving enough for the retirement they would like to have. This, of course, is not just an issue for individuals, but also for employers, where they have older employees whose performance is perhaps starting to decline and who would like to retire, but find they can't as they have inadequate retirement savings. There is therefore a genuine benefit to employers in offering support to their employees on saving for a pension and on wider financial planning issues. But a question we're often asked is how far can employers go with the support? Now, on the pension side, the position is in fact quite complicated by the way that pension schemes are regulated. For contract-based schemes, these are classed as an investment product and regulated by the Financial Conduct Authority. On the other hand, however, trust-based schemes aren't a regulated investment, and these are regulated by the pensions regulator. However, in broad terms, for both types of schemes, employers can provide information to their employees on the benefits of participating in the scheme, but should confine themselves to providing generic, factual information and avoid getting into the area of commenting on what might be appropriate to an individual's specific circumstances. Although legally authorization from the FCA isn't likely to be needed to give advice, employers are unlikely to have the requisite skills and experience to be able to provide proper advice. They may well face a claim where an employee suffers a loss as a result of advice which proves to have been incorrect. On the non-pension side, general help for employees on things like budgeting aren't within the scope of FCA regulation. So it's absolutely fine to provide help with this. In practice, we see employers supporting their employees in a number of ways. Things such as group sessions to explain how pensions and other savings products work and to help with wider budgeting and financial planning issues are things that we usually see really appreciated. Typically, we see them run by an external FCA authorised firm or a pension provider, but sometimes they're run by an in-house HR team. As well as being helpful to employees, sessions can also provide a valuable insight on the sort of issues of concern to employees and potentially impacting on their performance, and also on what softer types of benefits might really be valued by employees. Another thing that employees often appreciate is access to online budgeting and financial planning modelers. Generally, on the issue of support, one thing we'd recommend employers do when choosing or reviewing their pension provider, so this ties in with the type of platform that Jeremy mentioned, is to look at and road test the provider's pension investment platform and communications to see if they provide the sort of support that you think your employees would like to see. On the subject of specific employee issues, where an employee is looking for advice on what he or she should do, the best approach is to signpost him or her to one of the government's free help services. And these are currently Pensions Wise, the Pensions Advisory Service, and the Money Advice Service. Or you could suggest the employee seeks advice from an authorised financial advisor. But on this last point, it's worth just bearing in mind that employers can pay for up to £500 of pension advice provided to an employee on a tax-free basis. Our last slide is about what's referred to as decumulation, which is a rather complex name given to members using their pension pot to provide a retirement income. Deciding the best way to use pension savings can, quite frankly, be just as, if not more difficult than building up the pensions pot in the first place. Since April 2015, pension scheme members have had a lot more flexibility in how they can use their pension pots compared to the previous situation where many members had to purchase a level or increasing lifetime annuity. In addition to that option, members now have a couple more choices. So they have the option of flexi access drawdown. Now this is where the member can draw down any amount at any time, and including using those funds to purchase a short-term annuity. And another option is what goes by the catchy name of an uncrystallised funds pension lump sum, or UFPLUS for short. And this is where the member can draw down lump sums with 25% being tax-free, and they could again do that as often as they want. Now, it can be difficult for members to understand the pros and cons of all these options and select the one which is right for them, which is why trustees and managers of pension schemes are obliged to provide enhanced information about retirement options and point members to the Pensions Wise service. That provides free online, telephone and face-to-face guidance to individuals who are over 50. When selecting or reviewing a pension provider, we'd also recommend looking at what retirement support and options it offers and their associated costs. Much of the government's retirement guidance is actually very good, but again, employees may benefit from employer support in understanding their options. Guidance is also not the same as tailored personal advice, and employers may wish to consider if they would benefit from providing access to a free or subsidised IFA. Indeed, this is probably more important now as increasingly older employees are choosing to move to part-time working, with their income being supplemented by their retirement savings, and this can have tax implications. So, for example, the annual allowance for further pension saving will be reduced to just £4,000 when a member first flexibly accesses their pensions pot. It's also worth employers reminding members that they can use up to £500 of their pension pot on a tax-free basis to help pay for financial advice on how to use their pensions pot. And they can do this up to 3 times, although not more than once in a tax year. In reality, many employees don't or simply can't get advice on how to use their pension pot. Some improvements will be rolled out shortly so that firms offering drawdown to non-advised individuals must provide a range of ready-made investment solutions described as investment pathways to help individuals select investments that meet their broad objective for their pot in drawdown. All providers will be required to give individuals entering drawdown without taking advice 4 options for how they might want to use their drawdown pot. And these are leaving the money where it is, purchasing an annuity within the next 5 years, start taking the money as a long-term income within the next 5 years, or planning to cash in all the money, again, within the next 5 years. Large providers will be required to offer single investment solutions that correspond to each of 4 investment objectives, while smaller providers will be able to refer consumers to a government drawdown comparator tool. Pension providers will also be required to ensure that consumers take an active decision to invest a majority of their drawdown fund in cash, and they will also have to provide annual warnings to consumers who do decide to invest in cash about the likely impact on their long-term income. As a last point, and this may not apply to many of you listening today, I'd flag up the fact that flexibilities can also be very attractive to members of defined benefit pension schemes, especially where transfer values are high, and we have experience of quite sophisticated operations being set up to target employees of specific employers and encourage them to transfer their value of their benefits out of the scheme. Frequently, the sort of things we see is a scheme promising something like a guaranteed 8 to 10% investment return for investing in an off-plan luxury hotel development on a Caribbean island. And I think here the old adage remains apposite, but if it looks too good to be true, it probably is. Pension scams also have a way of bouncing back on employers and the trustees of their pension schemes. So if you do have a DB scheme, there can be value in running workshops to provide guidance on the issues which members should consider in deciding whether or not a transfer value is the right thing for them. So hopefully this session has given you a good feel for the main things employers can do to ensure that their employees have suitable retirement saving arrangements in place and enable them to retire from the business at the right time. There are a lot of issues which require careful consideration, and employers should bear in mind that they should also monitor how their pension scheme performs. We think that employers who are engaged with how their pension scheme operates and performs, pay a good level of contributions, and provide support to employees with their pensions and wider financial planning will have a genuine advantage in the way that they manage their workforce. And that just leaves me to ask if anybody has any questions.
Thanks, Andrew. We've had some questions come in. One question is, what management difficulties would arise if workers have inadequate pension savings? Well, I think that's a question for me. It seems that employees with inadequate pension savings may be reluctant to retire, and this may give the employer an issue as to how to manage such older employees out of the business without giving rise to age discrimination claims. And there is now no automatic default compulsory retirement age. So any compulsory retirement of older employees will need to be objectively justified to avoid age discrimination claims. And employers then may be faced with the need to carry out performance reviews to make compulsory retirements on capability grounds. I had another question for you, Andrew. This one is, to what extent is it a problem if a very high proportion of an employer's workforce are invested in a pension scheme's default fund? Should employers be trying to ensure that employees make active investment choices?
Good question, Jeremy. I don't think that's a problem in itself, as the whole reason for requiring a default fund is the recognition that many people will find it hard to engage with investments. But as I've said, if employers and a pension scheme provider can provide good learning resources and investments, I think that's a really helpful thing. And it also does emphasize, I think, the need to ensure that a default fund is appropriate for a particular employer's workforce, and in particular, to keep it under review.
I think we've got time for one final question for me, which is, what legal liability do employers have if their employees end up with insufficient pension savings where the employers have complied with the automatic enrolment legislation? And here I'd just reiterate that the employer's strict legal obligations are limited to paying the minimum automatic enrolment contributions. and there's no absolute legal obligation to go beyond that. Employers are not strictly liable for the emerging DC retirement benefits. However, as we have seen, there may be reputational risks and management difficulties for employers that have older employees who have inadequate pension savings. Well, it's now 1:30 p.m. I think that's all we have time for. Sorry if we haven't answered your question. We'll get back to you separately where that's the case. And that concludes our webinar. So it remains for me to wish you well, to keep well and keep safe, and thank you very much for attending. Goodbye.